How was your day? Maybe it asked you to be a lot of things. Capable, pleasant, composed. When part of you just wanted to stop and breathe for a minute. There's a poet who understood that exactly. The feeling of being lost in a crowd, while also carrying a whole interior world that no one around you can see. His name was Walt Whitman. Tonight's story is about exactly that. The feeling of being both invisible and immense, and what one man did with it. Get comfortable. It's okay if you drift. Maybe today you spent a lot of energy being a version of yourself that fit. And tonight you're a little tired of fitting. This book was written for exactly that moment. Whitman believed the ordinary self, tired, contradictory, unsure, was already worth celebrating. Tonight, let his voice hold that for a while. Leaves of Grass begins with a claim so simple it almost sounds like nothing. I celebrate myself. And what I assume, you shall assume. I is not Whitman alone. It is you. The book was published in 1855. There was no author's name on the cover, just a daguerreotype of a man in work clothes, hat tilted, staring directly at you. What kind of book begins? I celebrate myself. Most poets in 1855 were humble, polished, formal. Whitman walked in without a cravat and said, "The self is the subject, and the subject is everything." The year was 1855. America was 10 years from its Civil War. The country was enormous, violent, expanding, and deeply uncertain about what it actually believed. Here's where it gets interesting. Whitman wasn't writing from a study or a university. He was a printer's son from Brooklyn, setting his own type, reading proof by candlelight. He set the type himself. He carried the printed pages to the binder. He reviewed his own book anonymously, calling it an American bard at last. He was shameless in the best possible way. Song of Myself opens with a poet lying in the grass. He is doing nothing. He is loafing, and he is not apologizing for it. He's treating it as the most important act possible. A leaf of grass is no less than the journey, work of the stars, he wrote. The ordinary was not lesser. The grass was not smaller than the galaxies. It was equal to them. Then Whitman did something no American poet had done before. He treated the body as sacred. Not shameful, not a problem. The body was the soul's only visible form. Every week, one book. No pressure to have read it, no quiz at the end. If you'd like to know when the next one arrives, there's a subscribe button somewhere on this page. That's all. Whitman listed everyone. The carpenter, the mason, the pilot, the spinning girl, the duck shooter, the deacon. In one poem, they all appear in the same breath, none more important than another. Then there's the poem. There was a child went forth. Everything the child sees. A fish, a farmer, a shadow. The child becomes. The world enters the self and stays. There's more of this, much more. But not tonight. Tonight, just this chapter. The rest will be here. If tonight helped, even a little, subscribe. Next week, another book. Another night like this one. In 1855, Whitman sent his small, strange book into the world. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the most important literary voice in America, read it in a single sitting and wrote back immediately. Emerson wrote I greet you at the beginning of a great career. It was the most important letter in American literary history. And Whitman printed it on the spine of the next edition without asking. Most of America disagreed. A Boston paper called it a mass of stupid filth. A New York critic said it was unfit to be left on a table where women might find it. And this is the part most people miss. Whitman kept revising. The book grew across 9 editions over 37 years. It was never finished. It was always becoming. In section 6 of Song of Myself, A child comes to the poet holding a handful of grass and asks, "What is the grass?" Whitman tries to answer, and cannot stop trying. "Maybe the grass is the flag of his disposition," he says. "Maybe it is the handkerchief of the Lord. Maybe it is itself a child. Maybe it is the beautiful uncut hair of graves." Whitman's loafing was a kind of attention. He wasn't wasting time. He was practicing the belief that existence itself was enough. Just being here counted. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. He wasn't confused. He was honest. The self does not need to be tidy. Stay with this. It matters later. Whitman believed the act of touching a stranger, really seeing them, was a democratic act. It was how the country could become what it claimed to be. "I am the poet of the woman the same as the man," he wrote. In 1855, this was not a small thing. It was not even a large thing. It was almost an impossible thing. The question the book finally poses is the oldest one: can you believe you belong here? In this body, in this life, in this difficult and ordinary world? Whitman says yes. Tonight, maybe that's enough. Before the beard, before the broad hat, before the book. There was a boy on Long Island who spent his childhood with the ocean on one side and the farmland on the other. His father was Walter Whitman's serf. A carpenter, a quiet man, a body that labored and slowly broke. Walt named his first child after his father, out of love and something close to grief. His mother Louisa was the emotional center. Dutch Quaker roots. She believed in the inner light, the direct experience of the divine, no intermediary needed. Walt got that from her. Walt's formal schooling ended at 11. He became a printer's apprentice, setting type, breathing ink, learning that words were physical things you held in your hands before they became ideas. By his late 20s, Whitman was editing the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. He reviewed books, covered politics, wrote with opinions and without apology. He was good at it, better than the job deserved. Then he was fired. He'd taken the wrong side on slavery, opposing its expansion into new territories. The Eagle's owners wanted less trouble. Walt walked out into the Brooklyn street. In 1848, he took a job offer in New Orleans. 3 months traveling down the Mississippi, then working as a newspaper editor in a city that was unlike anything he had seen before. New Orleans in 1848 was America with the mask off. The slave markets were open. French and Spanish and African cultures pressed against each other. Every contradiction was visible. He came home 3 months later and started writing differently. The notebooks filled with something that didn't look like poetry. Lists, voices, overheard phrases, descriptions of bodies and faces. The notebooks were extraordinary. He recorded the names of things, every trade, every bird, every feeling he could find a word for. He was building a vocabulary for a country. Then there was the opera. Whitman heard Italian opera in New York, and something cracked open. The held note of a tenor, the aria's sweep and breath. He heard a new kind of line. "I am the poet of the body, and I am the poet of the soul." He wrote that line sometime around 1854. He knew finally what he was trying to do, and that no one had done it before. Ralph Waldo Emerson had published an essay in 1844 called "The Poet." It declared that America needed its own bard, someone to sing the new world in the new world's language. Whitman read Emerson's essay and believed it was written about him specifically, that it was a prophecy, and he was its answer. This was either delusion or exactly right, possibly both. Henry David Thoreau came to Brooklyn to visit Whitman in 1856. He had just finished Walden. He expected a wild man and found instead someone calm, specific, and hard to argue with. Thoreau admired Whitman's love of the natural world. The body poems troubled him. He wrote home to a friend, "He is a great fellow." It was high praise from Thoreau, and a little bit reluctant when the obscenity attacks came. Whitman's fiercest defender was a man named William Douglas O'Connor, a writer who published a pamphlet called The Good Gray Poet that stuck so hard it became Whitman's permanent nickname. Peter Doyle was a young streetcar conductor in Washington. He met Whitman on a rainy night on his car, and they became inseparable for years. Talking, walking, Whitman always listening. Anne Gilchrist was an English widow who read Leaves of Grass, fell in love with the poems, and then wrote Whitman a letter and said she was coming to America to marry him. He wrote back carefully. In 1860, Whitman added the Calamus poems, a sequence about love between men, named for the wild grass that grows at the water's edge. They are among the most intimate poems in the language. Children of Adam poems came alongside them, erotic, joyful, frank about heterosexual love in a way that 1860 America was absolutely not ready for. Whitman published both sequences anyway. Emerson pulled Whitman aside and asked him, as a friend, to remove the erotic poems before publishing. The conversation lasted 2 hours on Boston Common. Whitman listened carefully and said no. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. The Civil War began. Whitman was 42 years old, too old to enlist. His younger brother George did not hesitate. In December 1862, a casualty list appeared in a New York paper. George Whitman's name was on it. Walt was on the next train south, not knowing what he would find. He found George. A superficial wound. He would survive. But around him in the field camp were hundreds of men who would not. Whitman looked at them and made a decision: he would stay. The Wound Dresser is the poem that came from what followed. He wrote it years later, from the perspective of an old man remembering. The walking of the aisles, the dressing of wounds. The soldiers were young men from everywhere. Iowa, Virginia, New York, Georgia. They lay in the same ward. Some of them had been shooting at each other a week before. Whitman brought what he could: tobacco, postage stamps, writing paper, oranges, candy. He read to men who couldn't read. He wrote letters home for men too weak to hold a pen. Sometimes what a dying man needed was just for someone to sit there. Whitman learned to do nothing with great purpose. To be present without needing to fix what couldn't be fixed. He did this for 3 years. By the end, he had visited somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 sick and wounded men. His own health was breaking under the weight of it. During the war years in Washington, Whitman saw Lincoln several times. The president passing in an open carriage, the two men making eye contact across the street. They never spoke. Lincoln was shot on April 14, 1865. Whitman heard the news in Brooklyn. He sat down and wrote, "Oh, Captain, my Captain!" Rhymed, metered, traditional, not quite like him at all. Then he wrote the real one. When Lilacs last in the Dooryard bloomed. Longer, stranger, built around 3 images he held in tension: a lilac, a star, and a bird in a swamp. The hermit thrush in the poem sings about death, and its song is beautiful. The natural world has always known about death. It is not afraid, it keeps singing anyway. In January 1873, Whitman suffered a stroke. He was 53. His left side was partially paralyzed. He moved to Camden, New Jersey, to live with his brother George, who had survived the war. Camden could have been the end of it. Instead, it became a kind of court. Visitors arrived from across the world to sit with the poet. He kept writing. He kept revising the book, the final edition, called the Deathbed edition. was assembled in 1891. Whitman sat in his chair, directing the arrangement of the pages, deciding which poems went where, what the book finally was. Throughout all 9 editions, one thing never changed: the reader is directly addressed. You are in the book. Whitman never forgot he was speaking to someone, to a specific, tired, living person. Whoever you are holding me now in hand, he wrote that as if he knew. He did know. He knew someone would be here in whatever year, needing exactly what the poem had. Whitman's vision of America was not the America of Congress or the banks. It was the America of the carpenter and the pilot and the woman at the spinning wheel, all of them singing. "I Hear America Singing" is one of his shortest poems, barely 12 lines. Every worker sings their own song, specific to their work and their day. The country is the chorus. Can one book hold this much? The body and the soul, the worker and the president, the living and the dead, the certain and the contradictory. Whitman believed so. He spent his life proving it. His answer to the question of how oneself could contain so much. It can, because the self is not a private thing. The self is made of others, it always has been. You, in Leaves of Grass, is never decorative. Whitman means it. He is speaking to you. The person reading this in whatever year you happen to be, whatever you happen to be carrying. By the time the 3rd edition appeared in 1860, the key relationships were established: poet and reader, body and soul, self and multitude, past and future. The book was ready to meet the war. Now we go inside the poem itself. Song of Myself opens with a man lying in the grass doing nothing, and treating that nothing as the most serious work he has ever done. A spear of summer grass. That's the first image. Not a mountain, not a river. A single blade. And from that single blade, Whitman will eventually reach the stars. The scale is the point. What I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. He says this in the first section, plainly, as if it were obvious. And it isn't, and he knows it isn't. Section 5 is where the poem goes somewhere unexpected. The soul and the body lie together in the grass. An embrace that is also a mystical union, the moment Whitman becomes certain of everything. Emerson's transcendentalism said the soul rises above the physical world to touch the divine. Whitman said no, the divine is already here, in the grass, in the body, in the sweat and breath of an ordinary day. Section 8. A child carries a dead field mouse to the door of a farmhouse. The poem doesn't explain this. It just holds it there, the small death in the small hands, without flinching. Section 11 is one of the strangest and most beautiful in the book. 8 young men bathe in a river. A woman watches from her house on the bank. Unseen, longing, invisible. She imagines herself among them, her hands moving over their bodies in her mind. She owns 28 years and a fine house and is lonely. Whitman tells this with complete tenderness. Section 15, the great catalog. The duck shooter, the deacon, the spinning girl, the one-year wife, the lunatic, the machinist. Page after page, everyone gets a line, no one gets 2. The prostitute and the president appear in the same list. No explanation, no apology. The equal sign is the whole argument. Democracy is not a hierarchy dressed in softer clothes. These are really the thoughts of all men in all ages and lands, he writes in section 17. Not some men, all men, not this century, all ages. The claim is outrageous, and he means every word. Section 20. I am not contained between my hat and my boots. The self overflows its body. It extends into the ground and up into the sky and outward into other people's lives. I am the poet of the woman, the same as the man, and I say it is as great to be a woman as to be a man. In 1855, this was printed and sold in shops. It took a kind of nerve. The body, as Whitman catalogues it in section 24, is everything. The sweat of the laborer, the scent of armpits, the lungs and the liver and the hair. He names all of it and calls it holy. Walt Whitman, A Cosmos of Manhattan the Sun, section 24. He names himself like a geography, a coordinate, as if the self were a place you could locate on a map and visit. Section 26 opens. Now I will do nothing but listen. Then for 3 pages Whitman listens to the night sounds, the day's sounds, the sounds of America doing what it does without being observed. The sounds he hears include the bravura orgasm of a tenor, the carpenter's plane, a cricket at dawn, rain on rooftops, the sound of a mother calling her children in from the dark. And here's where it gets interesting. He puts the carpenter's plane beside the tenor's area. He refuses to rank them. The shaving of wood is music, the area is labor, both are holy. Section 28 is where the senses overrun the self. Touch overwhelms everything, and Whitman doesn't resist. He lets the senses take him somewhere that feels, for a moment, like dissolution. And then he returns. The crisis passes. The self gathers. Section 29. He finds equilibrium again, exhausted and larger than before. This is the pattern of the whole poem: expand, dissolve, return. I believe a leaf of grass is no less than the journey, work of the stars. Section 31. The grass and the stars equal, the ordinary and the cosmic equivalent. This is the whole argument in one line. Then the list continues. The ant, the egg, the tree, the running blackberry. None of them ranked. None of them less. The hierarchy of nature dismantled, line by patient line. Section 33 is where the poem becomes something like a dream. Whitman is suddenly everywhere. He is on a clipper ship. He is in a pioneer's wagon. He is at a slave auction in the South. The scenes of America arrive all at once. A birth on the frontier, a sea, fight at night, a massacre, a harvest. Whitman absorbs them all. The poem becomes a country trying to hold itself. He takes the suffering of others into himself, becomes the slave on the auction block, the wounded man on the field, the mother whose son has not come home. It costs him something real. Section 36. Whitman becomes John Paul Jones, the Revolutionary War admiral, fighting a losing sea battle. I have not yet begun to fight, he declares. The ship is sinking. He fights anyway. Section 38. After all the suffering absorbed, the self rises. Not triumphant exactly. More like a field after rain. Beaten down and then returning, the grass again, inevitable. Section 40. The poet turns to the reader and says, I dilate you with tremendous breath. It's an extraordinary claim. But Whitman has spent 40 sections earning the right to make it. Now the poem shifts. Crossing Brooklyn Ferry is a different poem, quieter, more direct. It is addressed entirely to the future. To you, specifically, crossing whatever water you cross. Whitman describes the ferry crossing in precise detail. The flood tide, the mast-hemmed wharves, the sailors hauling the ropes, the flies hovering on the water. Then he stops and asks, do you feel it too? What is it then between us? He asks. He is standing on the ferry in 1856. You are here in whatever year this is. And yet, what if the water is the same? What if the crossing is the same? I too had received identity by my body. He had felt what you feel. The confusion of being an I in a body, of not quite knowing where you end and the world begins. He knew. Then he does something remarkable. He confesses the ordinary sins. He had been vain. He had felt envy and spite. He had been evil too, not poetic evil, just regular, everyday human failure. It avails not time nor place, distance avails not. The ferry is crossing. The year is 1856. Also the year you're reading this. Time collapses in the poem. And somehow it works. The river holds them both, the poet in 1856 and the reader now. The water doesn't know what year it is. The crossing doesn't care. The light on the water is just the light on the water. Drum, taps, section came out of the war years. It is a different Whitman, quieter, more controlled. The long, exuberant lines have shortened. The war has done that. Young men move through the city in formation. The women line the streets. Everyone is pretending this is not what it is. Except the poem, which knows exactly what it is. Beat, drums, 3 words, then the drum beats through every space. Into the school and the church and the market, into the marriage bed, into the place you thought was safe. The war overwhelms the ordinary. This is what Whitman understood that the politicians didn't. The war was not an event. It was a weather. It got into everything. Come up from the fields, father. A letter arrives at an Ohio farm on a September morning. The poem knows what it contains before the family does. The reader knows too. Only the family doesn't yet. The mother reads the letter. Her son is not dead, yet. But the poem knows. The tone of the letter is wrong. Dear mother, I do not expect to live long. The September morning continues. The poem says the mother will never recover. She will live. But the mother who went out to the fields that morning will not be the mother who comes in from reading the letter. Something closes. Whitman doesn't explain the mother's grief. He doesn't comfort her. The poem's restraint is exact, as if the silence around the thing is truer than anything that could be said about it. The wound dresser begins, harassed and angry. An old man is being asked to remember the hospitals. He begins with anger. Then the memory takes over and the anger becomes something else. Each patient is named by wound, arm, side, knee, face, not the wounded as a category, each one specific, each one irreducible. This is Whitman's ethics made into grammar. Then, almost without warning, the poem pivots. I think I could turn and live with animals. Whitman is done with human complexity. Just for a moment, the animals seem easier. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. They do not make him sick discussing their duty to God. He admires them completely, but he doesn't leave. He never leaves. He returns to the human, with the animal's lesson held somewhere in his chest, a reminder that the self does not need to perform its suffering. The book is building toward something. Every catalog, every vision, every confession has been preparation. The self has been expanded, dissolved, returned, expanded again. What is it finally? Then it comes. Section 38. No, enough, enough! The self collapses under the weight of everything it has absorbed. The wound dresser, the dying soldier, the mother, the slave, it's too much. After the collapse, the poem doesn't end. The self gathers its pieces. Slowly, the way a field gathers itself after a hard rain. Something has changed. The gathering is not the same self as before. Section 44, the scale shifts upward. I am an acme of things accomplished, and I an closer of things to be. Every step of every ancestor has led to this moment, to this body, to this self. Think about what that means. Every choice your ancestors made, every road taken or not taken, brought you specifically to this specific night. Whitman finds that not terrifying but astonishing. Section 45. I open my scuttle at night and see the far sprinkled systems. He opens a trapdoor in the roof and looks at the stars. They are not remote. They are intimate. They are his. The stars in Whitman's poem are not cold. They are warm. They belong to the same world as the grass and the body and the ferry crossing. They are all one thing, and so are you. Section 46. The poet finally steps back. Not I, not anyone else can travel that road for you. After 45 sections of expanding, absorbing, containing, he gives it back to the reader. You must travel it for yourself. 5 words. After all the catalogs, the visions, the suffering absorbed, just 5 words. The poem's whole argument arriving at its simplest form. Now the Calamus poems begin, and the voice changes. Something quieter arrives. Whitman steps away from the crowd and speaks in a lower register, more carefully, more carefully. In Louisiana, Whitman imagines a live oak growing alone, its branches spreading, its moss hanging, needing nothing outside itself. He studies it with something close to envy, something close to longing. He breaks off a branch with its moss and carries it home to Brooklyn. It sits on his table and reminds him of something he can't fully say. The need for companionship that the oak doesn't seem to share. In Paths Untrodden opens the Calamus sequence. He steps away from the high road, away from the crowds, into the margins where a different kind of truth grows. Whoever you are holding me now in hand. This poem addresses the reader with a warning. The book may not be what you think. It may ask more than comfort. It may make demands. The book, says the book, could hurt you. It asks you to put down the shields. It asks you to be as undefended as the grass. And the grass, after all, gets walked on. He means this kindly. Are you the new person drawn toward me? He asks this with caution and hope in equal measure. He has been burned before. The reader has too, probably. They approach each other carefully. The tenderness of the Calamus poems is unlike anything else in the book. The large democratic voice drops. Something more personal, more careful, more afraid of being misunderstood arrives. Children of Adam sequence runs alongside Calamus, erotic, outdoor, celebratory. If Calamus is intimate and careful, Children of Adam is joyful and unashamed. Both are necessary. I Sing the Body Electric is one of the central poems of Children of Adam. The body is not the soul's prison, it is the soul's only evidence. It is the soul made visible and touchable. Whitman catalogues the woman's body from head to foot, not as a list of attractions, but as a geography, the way he would catalog a coastline or a river system. Equal, particular, worthy of time. Then the man's body receives the same attention, the same patience, the same reverence, the same unhurried catalog, nothing ranked above anything else. The democratic gaze turned on the human form, then the slave auction. The same poem that reverently cataloged free bodies now faces the body valued only in dollars. Whitman's fury surfaces, controlled, devastating, direct. Do you think I could leave comfortless you, who have not yet known me? The poet addresses the enslaved person directly, across the poem, across the history, with a vow he cannot keep and makes anyway.
Salute Amanda!
Whitman stands on the earth and greets every nation, every people, every person doing what people do everywhere. The scope is absurd. The sincerity is absolute. He names the Kanaka paddling his canoe, the Bedouin in the desert, the woman at the well in China, the child in the Siberian winter. All of them greeted, all of them included, none ranked. Song of the Open Road. This is the great departure poem, the one that gives permission. If Song of Myself is the invitation, Open Road is the moment the door swings wide. A foot in light, hearted I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me. The first line is an exhale, everything unnecessary dropped, the body moving, the road ahead. What the road asks is not safety. It asks for aliveness, for the willingness to be changed by what you encounter, for the courage to let the journey be the destination. From this hour I ordain myself loosed of limits and imaginary lines. This is not metaphor. Whitman means it as instruction, the self as its own authority, the self ordaining itself. The open road is not a vacation. This is what he means, and it is worth sitting with. It asks everything: your comfort, your certainty, your sense of who you are when no one is watching.
Ellens!
The road is before us, he cries at the poem's end. You, reading this, are invited. He has been waiting. The road has been waiting. It doesn't mind what year it is. Spontaneous May was the poem that most shocked 1855 readers, and still startles. It catalogues the body's desires with the same calm reverence Whitman gives to the blackberry and the cricket. His argument was simple, and in 1855, radical: nothing in nature is obscene. The tree blooms, the animal mates, the rain falls. Why should the human body be the one thing nature made wrong? The reviews in 1855 were extraordinary in their fury. A Boston critic called it a mass of stupid filth. A London paper said it was unfit for any society that considered itself civilized. Rufus Griswold, the most powerful literary critic in America, wrote that it was impossible to imagine how any man's fancy could go so far, unless he were possessed of the soul of a sentimental donkey. Whitman's response to all of it was quiet and certain. He wrote more poems. He kept revising. He wrote anonymous reviews praising the book. He waited, with the patience of a man who knows he is right. The second edition appeared in 1856, 32 poems expanded, and on the spine in gold letters, "I greet you at the beginning of a great career, R.W. Emerson." Borrowed without permission. Emerson was furious. He had written a private letter and found his words on a book cover in a Boston bookshop window. The friendship cooled, but the letter had already done its work. The friendship between Whitman and Emerson never fully recovered, but it had already done what it needed to do. Given a young book the credibility it needed to survive long enough to be right, the third edition in 1860 added Calamus and Children of Adam. Now the crisis deepened. This was no longer a strange book. It was a persistent one, and it was getting more explicit with each edition. The publisher Thayer and Eldridge went bankrupt shortly after the third edition. Whitman lost the plates, the physical type from which the book was printed. The book was out of his hands. Then the Civil War interrupted everything. The country was breaking apart, and the book had to wait while the thing it had been trying to prevent played out in fields and hospitals across the South. For 3 years, Whitman mostly stopped writing and started doing. The hospitals were the work. Presence was the poem. The body he had celebrated in verse now needed tending. In fact, the poems he wrote during the hospital years are shorter, compressed, exhausted. The long, exuberant lines of "Song of Myself" have become something quieter and more precise, like a man who has learned to say less and mean more. A sight in camp in the daybreak gray and dim. Whitman walks through the camp at dawn and finds 3 men shrouded in their blankets. He lifts each blanket in turn. Who are they? The first man is old and gray. The second man is a child, almost. The third has a face that makes Whitman stop. "Young man, I think I know you. I think this face is the face of Christ himself." This is Whitman's theology of the wound. That suffering does not separate us from the sacred. It is the place where the sacred is most present. The wound is not evidence of abandonment. A's toilsome I wandered Virginia's woods. Whitman finds a tree in a forest with words carved into its bark, a soldier's name and a date, bold, cautious, true, and my loving comrade. The carving is a poem. Someone was here. Someone loved someone. The tree holds it now because the tree will outlast the war and the soldier and possibly the nation itself. Whitman wrote letters for dying soldiers, became their voices when they no longer had one. The letters went to mothers in Ohio and Iowa and Maine. Some of them are still in archives. Imagine dictating your last words to a stranger. Imagine being the stranger who receives them, who holds a dying man's love for his mother in his hand and writes it down. That was Whitman's work. By the war's end, Whitman had sat beside hundreds of dying men. Some studies put the number of individual soldiers he visited at over 80,000. The scale of it is almost incomprehensible. The cost was visible. By 1864, Whitman was suffering recurring vertigo, headaches, and exhaustion that sleep didn't touch. The body that had celebrated itself was beginning to break. On the evening of April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning. Whitman was in Brooklyn. He heard the news, and he sat down and wrote, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," came first, rhymed, metered, traditional. It gave the public what it needed, a clear shape to pour its grief into. It was the most accessible thing Whitman ever wrote. Whitman came to dislike the poem. It was too neat, too controlled. The rhyme contained what grief actually is, which is uncontainable. He had written it for the public, and the public loved it forever. The tension was real and would never resolve. The poem the world wanted, and the poet he actually was. It's a tension every artist knows. It's what, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, was written to answer. When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed begins not with Lincoln's name, but with 3 images. A lilac bush, a star dropping in the west, and a bird singing in a swamp. Whitman holds all 3 images in tension throughout the poem. The lilac, the star, the bird. None of them resolves into a simple symbol. They stay themselves, and that is the point. Lincoln's coffin is traveling west. The funeral train crossing the country, stopping in city after city, people lining the tracks to see it pass. The country is doing its grief in public. Whitman watches but cannot speak yet. The grief is too recent. The poem circles the event rather than approaching it directly. The way you walk around something that is still too hot to touch. Then the thrush begins to sing from the swamp. Whitman hears it and knows. This is the voice that can speak about death directly, without flinching, without ornament, without the need for metaphor. The carol of the bird arrives. Come lovely and soothing death. And it is the most beautiful passage in all of Whitman. Death personified not as terror, but as something the earth has always known. Death, in the thrush's carol, is a dark mother, vast, quiet, patient. She has been waiting since before there was anyone to wait for. She is not cruel. She simply receives what the world sends her. Then the vision comes. A great cloud of the war dead and Lincoln together, moving westward, absorbed into the earth. Whitman sees it as real. The poem says this is where they go. Whitman releases the star. He lets Lincoln go into the past, into the history that will hold him. The elegy's work is not to prevent the loss, but to acknowledge it, and then allow it. The lilac he keeps. Memory does not end, but it changes. The lilac will bloom again next spring. The grief will not end, but it will bloom again too, and that is different from it being gone. Back in Song of Myself, section 51. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. This is not an apology. It is a declaration. The self is not consistent because people are not consistent. You are not the same person you were 10 years ago. Whitman says good. Neither was I. The inconsistency is the evidence of being alive. Section 52. The poem's last section. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. He is dissolving now. The self that began in the grass is returning to it. The final disappearance. Whitman dissolves into the earth, into the poem, into the reader. He stops being a person and becomes a presence. The book closes, but something remains. You will hardly know who I am, or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless. The promise made from inside the dissolution. The gift given from the other side of silence. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. The last instruction. The self is in the earth. Look down. It is there. It has always been there. The grass was always the answer. The self was never separate. That was the whole argument. The self, the grass, the reader, the boot sole, the earth, all one thing, continuous, the boundary between them always permeable. Passage to India. A late poem, written in 1871. The Suez Canal has just opened. The Transcontinental Railroad has just been completed. Whitman sees both as poems. The engineers and explorers have done something Whitman calls miraculous, connected what was separate. But the poem wants to go further. The soul's passage is still ahead, still unmapped. Passage to more than India! The exclamation is genuine. He is not being rhetorical. He means a passage beyond any geography, into the question the soul has always been asking. O soul, seest thou not God's purpose from the first? The late Whitman is more mystical, more searching. The democratic catalog has given way to something quieter. He is asking, not declaring. Darest thou now, O soul, walk out with me toward the unknown region? This is the last dare of the book. After all the roads traveled, one road remains, and it leads somewhere the poem cannot follow. Prayer of Columbus. Whitman as the old explorer, stranded on the Caribbean shore, his ships rotting, his mission not understood, his reports to the crown unread. He is not Columbus. He is Whitman. Whitman at 55, his health broken, his book still contested. The great democratic America he imagined still unrealized. Finds in Columbus's abandonment a mirror he can finally look into. A noiseless, patient spider, perhaps the most perfect short poem Whitman ever wrote. The soul is a spider. It stands on a promontory and throws out filaments, hoping one will catch. The soul, the poem says, is ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them. The making of poems as an act of spinning silk into the void and waiting to see what it touches. To a locomotive in winter. Whitman faces the train head on and calls it beautiful. The smoke, the steel, the pistons, the whistle. The machine is not less sublime than the mountain. It is sublime. Whitman's America never chose between the pastoral and the industrial. It held them together. The locomotive and the grass, the factory and the ferry. The democratic song includes the pistons, the sleepers. The great night poem. Everyone in America is asleep at once. Whitman's dreaming self moves through the night, visiting every sleeping body from coast to coast. The dreaming Whitman visits the rich in their beds, the poor in theirs. He visits the dying and the newborn. He sits beside the sleeper who is afraid and the sleeper who is at peace. Sleep is the one democracy that actually works. In sleep, the rich man and the poor man are equally helpless, equally undefended, equally given over to something they cannot control. The enslaved man dreams of freedom. It is the only place in the poem where the word applies, where the chain isn't real, where the boundary doesn't hold, where the body goes where it wants to go. The poem descends into darkness. Whitman's own nightmares arrive. the confusion of identity, the loss of self, the fear beneath the celebration. The sleepers goes where the day poems cannot, and then, morning, the world wakes. The sleepers return to themselves. Whitman's dreaming self returns too, carrying everything it witnessed through the night, changed by it, enlarged. I dreamed in a dream I saw a city invincible to the attacks of the whole of the rest of the earth. The ideal democracy, visible only in the dream, the America that could be if it chose to be. In Camden, the visitors kept coming. Young poets arrived from Boston and New York. Writers from England crossed the Atlantic. He received them all in the same small room, with the same calm attention. Horace Traubel was 25 when he began visiting Whitman every day in Camden. He recorded every conversation, every comment, every silence. 9 volumes, the old man preserved in transcript, the good gray poet. The nickname O'Connor gave him, the one that stuck. A monument while still alive. Whitman wore it with the slight discomfort of a man who preferred to be read to being enshrined. He had outlived most of his enemies. He had outlived most of his lovers. He had outlived several of the editions of his own book. The equanimity was not performed, it was earned, line by line. The deathbed edition of 1891-92, The Final Leaves of Grass, adds one last cluster. Goodbye, my fancy. The title is not sad. It has the quality of someone taking leave at the end of a good party. Goodbye, my fancy is the last poem cycle. He is taking leave of everything, the fancy that drove the poems, the body that housed the self, the book that held both, with lightness, not grief. Yet let me not be too hasty. Even in the farewell, he resists. The curiosity is still there. The world is still interesting. The departure can wait a moment longer. This too is very like him. The book is not finished. It is complete. This is the distinction the poem has been working toward for 37 years. Finished would mean done. Complete means whole, rounded, fully given, sealed with intention. Finished would mean the work stopped because there was nothing more to say. Complete means the work found its shape, and the shape is itself the argument. The book is the democracy it describes. He had designed his own tomb, a simple granite mausoleum in Harley Cemetery, Camden. He supervised the construction from his chair, choosing the stone, approving the proportions. Even this was a poem. Walt Whitman died on March 26, 1892 in Camden, New Jersey. He was 72. The cause given was pleurisy and pneumonia. He died, as he had lived, slowly and with great attention. What he left was not a tidy argument. It was a posture, a way of standing in the world that is available to anyone who wants it, in any century, at any hour. The posture: attention, acceptance, celebration, solidarity, not one at a time, all four simultaneously, all the time, as a practice, as a way of being alive that does not require perfection to begin. The gift the book gives, and it is only one gift, though it comes in many forms, is permission. Just that. Permission to be exactly this, exactly you, tonight, in exactly this moment. The grass one more time, because the grass is always the answer. Every blade, the common ordinary growing thing, including the grass under wherever you are right now. It's there. What resolution looks like in leaves of grass is not a solved problem. It is a problem held with both hands, without flinching, the way Whitman held the contradictions of America and called them multitudes. The American self, as Whitman finally saw it, not the individual triumph of the lone hero, but the collective song, every voice, every trade, every body, singing its own note in the same enormous choir. "I am large," said quietly now, not as announcement but as comfort. You are large too. The largeness is not arrogance, It is generosity, the self that makes room for everything it encounters. The story in one breath. A man in 1855 looked at the grass and the body and the crowd on the ferry and the dying soldier and said, "All of this is sacred. You are sacred. You were already enough, and still the grass grows." The story is complete. The grass is still there. Under the building where you are, under the road outside, under whatever is between you and the earth, still growing. Before we leave the poem, let's step back. Who was Walt Whitman, the man? Before the beard grew long and the hat became a symbol. He was born May 31, 1819 in West Hills, Huntington Township, Long Island. Flat farmland, the Atlantic close, the sky enormous in every direction. There were 9 children. The father drank and struggled. The family moved often, from Long Island to Brooklyn and back, always one step ahead of a difficult situation. Young Walt's reading was voracious and unsupervised. Dante, Homer, Shakespeare, the Bible, he read them all at once, without a teacher to tell him which was more important. The apprenticeship system was how working class boys got an education in 19th century America. Not in classrooms but in trades, learning by doing beside someone older who knew. The penny press was democracy's instrument in the 1830s and 40s. Cheap newspapers that anyone could buy, anyone could read, anyone could write for. Whitman loved them. Whitman's political formation was Jacksonian. He believed in the ordinary man in labor, in democracy not as a theory, but as a daily practice in the street and the workplace. The slavery question was not abstract for Whitman. It was about the body, whether a human body could be owned. His entire poetics of the body was a response to that obscenity. Manifest Destiny was the great American story of Whitman's time. The belief that the continent was destined to be settled from coast to coast. Whitman celebrated it and never fully reckoned with its cost. The Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 troubled Whitman. He opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, but also believed in American expansion itself. The contradiction sat in him. New Orleans in 1848. This is where Whitman's sense of America became fully complicated. The city was beautiful, violent, layered, contradictory. He absorbed it all and went home changed. The American literary world of 1855 was polished and imported. Longfellow wrote in European forms. Hawthorne worked in allegory. Poe was strange and ornamental. Then Whitman arrived. American poetry before Whitman rhymed, measured itself carefully, and deferred to English models. What Whitman did to the line was like removing a corset. The poem could breathe. The long line, the breath-length line that Whitman invented for American poetry, came from several sources, but it was also simply how he heard the world when he listened without the corset on. The King James Bible was one of Whitman's primary models. Its long parallelisms, its catalogs, its direct address, "Hear, O Israel," are everywhere in Leaves of Grass. Italian opera was the other source. The held tenor note, the aria that takes as long as it takes. Whitman heard music that refused the 4-bar phrase and built a line to match. Emerson's essay, The Poet, published in 1844, called for an American bard. Our low-growling, our stumps and their politics, our fisheries, our Negroes are yet unsung. Whitman read that and started writing. Transcendentalism, the philosophical movement that shaped Whitman, held that the divine was present in nature and in the individual soul, accessible without church or priest. But Whitman's transcendentalism was dirtier than Emerson's. Emerson's divine was reached by rising above the body. Whitman's was found by going deeper into it. His mother's Quaker roots gave Whitman something essential: the belief in the inner light. the direct experience of the sacred, no intermediary needed. The book is a Quaker document in that sense. Phrenology, Whitman believed in it. The science, now discredited, held that the skull's shape revealed character. He had his own head rayed and was pleased by the results. Photography had just arrived. Whitman was fascinated. The body captured, fixed in time, made into an object you could hold. He sat for portraits constantly and loved every one. The first edition physically, green cloth cover, gilded spine and title, oversized pages, no author name. Only the daguerreotype of a man in work clothes looking directly at you. The first edition contained 12 poems, including Song of Myself, I Sing the Body Electric, The Sleepers, and There Was a Child Went Forth. 12 poems that changed American literature. Self-publishing and self-promotion. Whitman wrote 3 anonymous reviews, praising Leaves of Grass, then let them circulate. It was shameless and effective and perfectly democratic. 9 editions, each one a revision. Each revision a changed Whitman. The young Brooklyn printer becoming the Civil War, wound dresser becoming the good gray poet in Camden. After the war, the book changed tone. The long, exuberant lines didn't disappear, but they were interrupted by shorter, quieter poems, as if the war had taught him when to stop talking. Democratic Vistas, published in 1871, was Whitman's prose critique of post-war America. He was angry. The Gilded Age wasn't the democracy he'd imagined. The money was winning. His disappointment was real and worth noting. Whitman was not naive. He saw the corruption and the inequality clearly. He kept believing in the ideal anyway, not because he was foolish, but because he had chosen to. Reconstruction, the attempt to rebuild the South and integrate the formerly enslaved, began failing almost immediately. Whitman saw it, but his response was insufficient to the scale of the failure. The Camden exile. How does a poet become a monument while still alive? Slowly, and with some discomfort. Whitman accepted the role because it brought readers. He never fully accepted the reduction. The Saturday visits. Every weekend, people arrived from everywhere to sit with the poet. From Boston, from London, from as far as Australia. He received them all with the same unhurried attention. Gerard Manley Hopkins read Leaves of Grass in the 1860s and wrestled with it his whole life. Whitman's rhythm became the pressure against which Hopkins developed his own sprung rhythm. Oscar Wilde visited Whitman in Camden in 1882. Wilde was 27 and newly famous. Whitman was 62 and established. They drank elderberry wine and talked for hours. Whitman's health in the Camden years was a slow reduction. More strokes, growing paralysis. The body that had celebrated itself now requiring care. He wrote through all of it. British readers found Whitman before American readers did. Swinburne, Tennyson, and John Addington Symonds embraced the book enthusiastically, while American universities still kept their distance. American academia resisted for decades. The form was too loose, the subject matter too frank, the politics too democratic. Universities prefer a poet who stays on the shelf and doesn't make demands. The notebooks. 50,000 pages of drafts, observations, lists, overheard conversations. They reveal what the finished poems cost. How much labor went into the apparent spontaneity. The notebooks show a Whitman who tried and failed and tried again. Who crossed out lines, who reconsidered words, who spent years on a phrase that looks effortless on the finished page. The poem as democratic object, made to be held, read in pieces, passed around, worn out. Whitman wanted the book used, not preserved. A book with broken spine is a book that's been loved. The reader in Whitman's imagination was always present, always loved, always specific, always real. He wrote to one person at a time, even when he was addressing the nation. The question of biography and the poems. How much does it matter who Whitman was? He would say, read the poem. The poem is the life made into the form it needed to take. His answer, read the poem. I Am Large is not autobiography, it is instruction. The poet put himself in the poem, so you could find yourself there too. The deathbed edition, assembled in the Camden room, the pages around him, the poet in his chair, directing the arrangement of the final order, the last act of a life given to arrangement. His last letter was to Anne Gilchrist's daughter, thanking her family for years of friendship. He signed it, Walt, just that, the large name reduced to its intimate form. The night before he died, reportedly peaceful, his breathing slowed through the hours. The room was quiet. The Camden street was quiet. The grass, somewhere outside, was still there. The funeral. Hundreds attended. The coffin was rough wood, as he specified. He had asked for simplicity. In death, as in life, he wanted nothing that set him above the ordinary. Within 10 years of his death, Whitman was in every American school. The book that had been called filth was now being taught to children. Time, as he had suspected, was on his side. What the book cost him, the obscenity accusations, the lost government job in 1865, the hostile reviews, the broken health, the long waiting. He paid the cost and never seemed to regret it. What it gave him was the only thing he wanted. A reader, in any century, who finished the book feeling a little less alone. If you're here tonight, he got what he wanted. The immediate American response to Whitman's death was reverence. Within a decade, the man who had been called obscene was being called the father of American poetry. Song of Myself entered the American school curriculum slowly, reluctantly at first, then completely. By 1910, it was everywhere. By 1950, it was unavoidable. The poets who came next were all reckoning with Whitman, whether they admitted it or not. Emily Dickinson, Edwin Arlington Robinson, Carl Sandburg, all writing in his aftermath. Emily Dickinson and Whitman never met. They were near contemporaries. She was born in 1830, he in 1819. Two poets responding to the same American void with completely opposite instruments. Carl Sandburg's Chicago, in 1914, O Hog Butcher for the World, is the direct descendant of Whitman's labor catalogs, the city addressed as a body, the workers named and celebrated, the Harlem Renaissance, the flowering of Black American art and literature in the 1920s, drew deeply from Whitman's permission to name the self, to celebrate the body, to claim a voice. Langston Hughes read Whitman early and carefully. The catalog form, the direct address, the democratic subject matter. Hughes took all of it and brought it into the 20th century's specific American reality. Allen Ginsberg stood in a San Francisco supermarket in 1955 and wrote, Howl. The breath line was Whitman's. The catalog was Whitman's. The furious love of the marginalized was Whitman's. Ginsberg called Whitman, Dear Father, in a poem. He visited the supermarket in a vision and found Whitman there, still shopping, still cataloging, still finding the sacred in the commercial ordinary. Pablo Neruda wrote, I was 12 years old and I had read Whitman. He credited the American with teaching him the large line, the catalog, the democratic embrace of everything, Neruda's odes to common things, to a tomato, to socks, to a pair of scissors. Are Whitman's democratic reverence for the ordinary translated into Spanish and given to new objects. Jorge Luis Borges wrote about Whitman obsessively, the invented self, though I, that is larger than any individual, the question of whether the biographical poet and the poetic I are the same person. Fernando Pessoa took Whitman's multitudes to their logical conclusion, inventing entirely separate poets with separate biographies, separate styles, separate beliefs, the self-containing multitudes taken literally. D.H. Lawrence wrote the most brilliant hostile reading of Whitman, admiring the impulse while rejecting the merger. Whitman's is the greatest of the attempts to merge. Lawrence wrote, "The attempt is heroic." Lawrence's Studies in Classic American Literature gave Whitman a chapter that is itself a masterpiece. Two strong voices arguing across the page, the critic shaped by what he fights. LGBTQ readers and writers have claimed Whitman across a century, finding in the Calamus poems the first major American poem of same-sex love, the permission that had been there since 1860. Calamus poems as a founding text, the argument that love between men is natural, beautiful, and worth celebrating in verse. A century before Stonewall, Whitman was there first. Adrienne Rich read Whitman with a complicated respect, grateful for the permission, critical of the masculine self that claimed to speak for everyone. Her work is a conversation with his. The civil rights movement reread, "I hear America singing," and ask which Americans? Which voices were in that chorus? Which workers were listed? Who was missing? Muriel Rukeyser's Book of the Dead updated Whitman's catalog of suffering, documenting the Hawk's Nest tunnel disaster of 1930, the Silica deaths, the company that lied. Whitman's form, different facts. In 1989, the film Dead Poets Society put "Oh Captain" into mass culture. A teacher stands on a desk, students follow. Whitman reached millions in 2 minutes. What that scene did, for better and worse, was introduce generations to Whitman as permission and rebellion. The student standing on the desk is doing what Whitman did in 1855. The Whitman Archive. His manuscripts are held in the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, Yale, Harvard. Scholars still find new things in the 50,000 notebook pages. Leaves of Grass has been translated into more than 25 languages. What travels with the translation? The spirit, usually. What is left behind? The breath-length line sometimes. The line in translation. Can the breath length survive? Different languages breathe differently. The long Whitman line in Spanish is natural. In Japanese, it becomes something else entirely. Both are true. Whitman and photography. He was the first major poet to collaborate seriously with the camera. He sat for more than 100 portraits. He gave them away. He wanted his face in the world. The 1855 daguerreotype, the image that replaced an author's name on the cover. The body as signature, the face as argument. You cannot read the book without first meeting the man. Contemporary poets who carry the inheritance. Claudia Rankine, Sharon Olds, Ocean Vuong, each in different ways continuing the Whitman practice of attending to the body, naming the self, addressing the reader directly. Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, a letter from a son to a mother, revives Whitman's letter form, his direct address, his willingness to be tender without apology. The catalog is formed today, in poetry and in prose. The list is resistance, as abundance, as a refusal to rank what should not be ranked. Whitman's grammar is still being spoken. Whitman and democracy. The idea that has been tested, broken, revised, questioned, and yet returns, because the alternative is worse, and because someone keeps writing poems about it. The question the book keeps asking: can you hold the contradiction? Can you contain both the celebration and the grief, both the ideal and the failure, without choosing one and discarding the other? Can America? Can any nation hold itself accountable to its own ideals while failing them daily? Whitman believed the question was worth keeping open. He kept it open for 37 years. I contain multitudes has escaped the poem entirely. It lives in the culture now as a phrase people use without knowing its source. The highest form of literary influence, the idea that became language. Why did it escape? Because people needed permission for their own contradictions. Because the self that doesn't need to be consistent is not a failure, it's alive. Whitman said so first. The grass, one more time, still growing, still ordinary, still miraculous. It doesn't know it's in a poem. It doesn't need to. It was always doing what the poem says it does. What Whitman finally is. Not a monument but a practice. Something you do rather than something you admire. The practice of attending, naming, not looking away, finding the sacred in what's actually there. The practice attending, naming, celebrating, not looking away, available to anyone in any year, without a degree or a credential or prior experience. The book is still handing it out. The reader who finds this at 2 a.m, who picks up the book when they can't sleep, when something has broken, when the day was too much. That is the reader Whitman always imagined. The book is a living thing because it addresses the living. Tonight, you are the living. The book has found what it was looking for. So have you. The final section begins here. The pace slows. The words grow quieter, like a river nearing its widening. The last lines of Song of Myself return now. The grass, the boot soles, the promise made from the earth. What the book was finally, a permission slip, signed in 1855, no expiration date, still valid tonight. The self that contains multitudes, and so does tonight. Everything you brought to this hour is here. What you carried today, all of it, Whitman saw. He named it. He said it was enough. The body's tiredness is not a failure. Whitman said so. You worked, you showed up. That counted. The grass under everything, ordinary, patient everywhere, under the city, under the road, under wherever you are. The ferry still crossing, the same water, the same light, the same crossing it has always been. The wound dresser's hands, moving quietly through the ward. Care as the simplest love, no ceremony. I am large, said quietly now, said as comfort, not announcement. You are large too. The open road behind you today. You traveled it. That was enough. It's always been enough. What Whitman wanted was simple. That you exist. That you notice. That was all. The night settling now. The words growing slower. The images simpler, like breath before sleep. A field at night. The grass breathing in the dark. The sky enormous above it. The sound the grass makes. Wind moving through it. Old as any language. Older. The stars Whitman opened his scuttle to see. The same ones still there. Patient as always. Goodbye my fancy, said softly. Not sadly. The way you'd say goodnight to something dear. The poet dissolving into the earth. And the earth is right here, under everything, always. The reader addressed one last time. You were always the one this was written for. The breath slowing. The narration thinning at the edges. The way fog thins at morning. The sleep that comes. Like grass, like water, like a field at rest under stars. The self growing very quiet. The thoughts not needing to finish. They don't have to. The book still open somewhere. Its pages held in the night air, patient. Whitman at rest in Camden. His work given away completely. Nothing held back. The grass always returning. Spring after spring. Through the graves. Through everything. The book will still be here tomorrow. So will we. Sleep well. The night deepening. No need to stay awake for this. The field will be here. The field one final time. The grass and the stars and the wide patient dark. the self-released, not lost, just resting. The way the grass rests between the winds. Look for me under your boot soles. The last instruction softened now, almost a whisper. The breathing of the world, continuous, unhurried. The same rhythm it has always kept. The small sounds of the night, grass, wind, water, your own breath among them, nothing required. Just this, the night, the grass, the stars, nothing else is needed. The poem and the night becoming the same thing. The dissolving, the grass, sleep, the grass, and sleep, and always, underneath everything, the grass.